Most people grow up believing war crimes are something other countries get accused of, the kind of headlines that feel distant, uncomfortable, and honestly, easy to ignore. But what if I told you that some of the most documented war crimes in modern history aren't hidden in secret archives or conspiracy forums? They're in official reports, declassified documents, and even US government investigations? That's the part nobody really talks about. And before you assume this is some anti-America rant or internet hot take, it's not. This isn't opinion. This is history, laid out war by war, using the same international laws that judge every nation. No exaggeration, no cherry picking. Just what was done, who knew about it, and how it was justified at the time. Because once you start connecting the dots, from early US expansion to Vietnam to the War on Terror, something uncomfortable becomes impossible to unsee. These weren't just bad moments. They were patterns, policies, decisions signed off at the highest levels. So if you've ever wondered why accountability almost never happens, if you've ever felt like history books skip over the messier parts, or if you just want to understand the side of war that rarely makes it into classrooms, stick with me. Because by the end of this video, you're going to look at modern warfare and the stories we tell about it very differently. To understand how the United States has been accused of war crimes, we need to start with something important. War crimes aren't about intent or patriotism. They're about actions. International law doesn't ask why something was done first. It asks what happened and who it happened to. With that in mind, we're going to move chronologically, because patterns only become clear when you see the full timeline. Long before the US was fighting wars overseas, its earliest conflicts were fought at home, during westward expansion and the wars against Native American tribes. Entire villages were destroyed, civilians were killed, and food supplies were intentionally burned to force starvation and relocation. In many cases, women and children were targeted alongside combatants. While international humanitarian law was still developing at the time, modern legal scholars widely agree that actions like forced displacement, mass civilian killings, and deliberate starvation would clearly qualify as war crimes under today's legal standards. These weren't isolated moments of battlefield chaos. They were strategies. The goal wasn't just military victory, it was removal. And that mindset wouldn't disappear. It would evolve. At the turn of the 20th century, the United States found itself fighting a brutal counterinsurgency in the Philippine-American War. This conflict is rarely discussed, but it produced some of the first official US investigations into wartime abuse. American soldiers testified under oath about using torture techniques like the water cure, an early form of waterboarding. Villages were burned to the ground. Civilians were herded into camps. Entire regions were subjected to scorched earth tactics designed to break resistance through fear and starvation. What makes this moment especially important is that none of this was hidden. US senators openly debated these crimes. Military leaders acknowledged them. And despite public outrage at the time, accountability was minimal. The pattern was already forming: exposure, outrage, and then silence. World War II is often described as the Good War, and compared to the atrocities committed by Axis powers, that reputation makes sense. But even in this conflict, the United States wasn't immune from violating the laws of war. There are documented cases of surrendered Japanese prisoners being executed, particularly in the Pacific Theater, where racial dehumanization was widespread. Then there's the bombing campaign. Entire cities were deliberately targeted, not just for military infrastructure, but to break civilian morale. Firebombing raids killed hundreds of thousands of non-combatants. These actions weren't forgotten. In fact, they directly influenced the creation of stricter post-war international law. Because the world had just witnessed how devastating modern warfare could be when civilians became acceptable targets. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain debated to this day, but regardless of how they're justified militarily, they raised serious legal and ethical questions about civilian targeting. questions that still shape how war crimes are defined today. The Korean War is often called the Forgotten War, but declassified US documents have revealed incidents that are impossible to ignore. In some cases, US forces were ordered to treat large groups of refugees as potential enemy combatants. That policy led to mass civilian killings, including women and children, who were caught between shifting front lines. What's disturbing isn't just the violence itself, but the language behind it. Internal communications show these weren't always split-second decisions. They were orders passed down the chain of command. And once again, it took decades before the public learned the full scope of what happened. Then comes Vietnam, the war that permanently changed how Americans view military power. The My Lai massacre is the most infamous example, where hundreds of unarmed civilians were slaughtered by US troops. But focusing only on My Lai misses the bigger picture. Vietnam introduced free fire zones, areas where anyone left inside was automatically assumed to be an enemy. Villages were destroyed preemptively. Chemical agents like Agent Orange were sprayed across the countryside, leaving long-term environmental damage and health effects that persist generations later. Internal reports, including the Pentagon Papers, revealed that military leaders knew civilian casualties were far higher than what the public was told. My Lai wasn't shocking because it was unique. It was shocking because it was exposed. Finally, we arrive at the modern era, the war on terror. Images from Abu Ghraib prison shock the world. Detainees tortured, humiliated, and abused by US personnel. At first, officials claimed this was the work of a few bad apples. But later investigations told a different story. Many interrogation techniques were approved, redefined, or legally rebranded at the highest levels of government. Black sites, extraordinary rendition, indefinite detention, drone strikes that killed civilians far from active battlefields. In some cases, US officials themselves later admitted that certain actions crossed the line into torture. And once again, accountability stopped short of the people who designed the system. So why does this keep happening? Because powerful nations often investigate themselves. International courts usually lack jurisdiction unless a country agrees to it. And the US rarely does. Lower-level soldiers may face punishment, but those who authorize policies almost never do. The system is built to protect command structures, not challenge them. And this is where the conversation usually gets uncomfortable. Yes, other countries commit war crimes too. Yes, war is chaotic, but legality doesn't disappear because something was strategic or because the right side won. International law exists specifically to set limits, even during war. Understanding these cases isn't about tearing a country down. It's about seeing history clearly. Because when war crimes are ignored, minimized, or justified as necessities, they don't disappear. They repeat. And the only way to stop that cycle is to stop pretending it doesn't exist.